Hi, I'm Kathryn Van Wagoner. I am a missionary at the Family History Center at the BYU Library, and I am grateful to be here today to talk with you a little bit about the website Scotland's People. Curious in the chat, tell me, like on a scale of 1 to 3, 3 being fantastic, how familiar are you with this website? Okay, thank you. This is great. All right, well, let me show you how I have found some success using this website, and hopefully everybody will get to learn something. So when we're looking for Scottish records, I've used 5 main sources of records. Family Search has some Scottish records, Ancestry has some. They usually kind of fill in each other's gaps. Find My Past contributes, My Heritage, and then Scotland's People is probably the biggest source of records. And they have a physical archive that's called the National Records of Scotland. This is their motto, their information that they're about helping to preserve the past and record what's going on and informing what we do in the future. And then there is this website, Scotland's People. So we're going to look through what they have here in terms of some of the more common records that we use, and then we'll take a peek at some of the less common things just to be more aware of them. So in this collection of records, we have birth records that are over 100 years old. When they are over 100 years old, they're made available. Marriage records that are over 75 years old, and then death records that are over 50 years old. So let's take a look at those dates a little bit more in depth. Now, don't worry too much about memorizing this, but here's sort of a big picture of it. When we get in to use the website, we do get some more information, or that this information is also put before us. So the first recorded parish records in Scotland were in 1553. And then in the 1560s, the Catholic Church was abolished, and then Presbyterianism became more of the leading church. In 1564, there are where we find our earliest known, what were called the blotter registers. And then in 1600, the calendar changed, so the year began on January 1st. So if you are getting into records back that far, you'll find that the change in calendar sometimes plays a role in understanding the records. I have not personally had experience with that. So then the civil registration records began in January of 1855. This includes births and marriages and deaths in every parish in Scotland. So it's sometimes often a joy to search records after 1855. The Scotland census began in 1801, but until 1831, there were no names, it was just statistics. So now we have the 1841, and then every 10 years, census records are available through 1921. And the 1931 census will come available in 2031. They have a 100-year privacy law there. And those censuses provide us with names, ages, relationships, occupations, and residencies. Before 1855, there's a little bit more detail here. The laws required ministers to keep registers starting in 1616. And then the Church of Scotland permanently was established in 1690. And there's sort of breaks in the records due to these different situations. I'm not going to read through all of those details. You can make a note if there's a year that you're particularly concerned about, that there may be some breaks. But the one thing to understand is after 1855, the term parish could be a church parish, which was ecclesiastical, or a civil parish, which is government. And they did not always correspond geographically. So we have to keep that in mind when we're searching our records. Let's use an example from my family. This is a photo of James Owen Sullivan. He's the one standing on the far right, and his wife, Jane Ann, who's the only woman in the photo. And he was in the British military and stationed in India. And I have not been able to identify anyone else in the photo. But this is an interesting photo, and I have some good information on James Owen and Jane Ann Johnson, but what I didn't have was the names of his parents. So this is the process that I went through to do that. This is a record that I was able to get in Ancestry, where it was a registry of their marriage. And I have some information. He was a farrier, a sergeant, and he went by the name Owen and married Jane Johnston. She was a spinster, and they were married in North Leith in Edinburgh in 1863. So with that information in mind, I went to the Scotland's People website. This is the front page of Scotland's People, and notice that it gives you several places to do a search. So at the top, there's a link to search the records, but it also just immediately pops up with an opportunity to search people, places, looking along the line in the center of this slide, people, places, virtual volumes, maps and plans, and there is also an image library. I prefer to go all the way down to this orange bar at the bottom that says search all the records, because I get the most control over what my search looks like. So we're going to start with a people search. When you choose search all the records, you get these choices. And notice that the dates are on here, the 1855 for the statutory registries, and then the church registry dates, and then the census dates are here. So I was looking for a marriage in 1863, so I went to statutory registers and chose marriages. But before we do that, let me show you these other things that come up in the advanced research options. So there are many. There's more here than I think one person could really have the time to dig into, with tax records, legal records, migration records, prison registers, and employment records, specifically those of lightkeepers and the Scottish Women's Land Army. So many different categories. If you have an idea of where to look, you can find some good information. All right, so to our marriage search, I put in the name Sullivan, James Owen, and surname for Jane is Johnson Jane. I put in a little bit wider range of years, and I did not specify the location. When I'm doing a search, I like to start a little broad, not too broad, because that doesn't help much, but just keep things a little bit broad. And this brought up no results. So I decided to delete Jane's last name and see what else. And I also took out James from James Owen, because the record just said Owen for the other record. So I think I only knew the name James Owen from my grandfather's journal. So it didn't seem to be that useful in the search. And ta-da, I found the record. So this comes up in a slightly or a small reduced index form. I get the surname and the first name, and then the spouse's name, the year, there's a reference number, and then the registration district name it shows me. So I wanted to see more of that record, so I opted to purchase the record with 6, that tells me on the right that I need 6 credits. So let me show you how this works. I ask for sure, do you really want this? And yes, I did. So before we get to see the record, let me explain how the Scotland's People credit system works. We purchase credits in bundles of 30, 40, 80, or 160. And I've done the math, and your price per credit is the same whether if you buy 30, 80, or 160 credits, they all come out the same. But if you buy 40 credits, you're saving about 3 cents per record. So in essence, they're all, depending on the exchange rate, they're going to work out to be about $2 per record. All of the records that I've ever looked at are 6 credits. Some of the more obscure records have different costs to them, but I usually will just buy a 10-pound bundle of 40 credits. And when you do that, I've had no trouble at all using the secure World Pay. It's kind of like PayPal for international purchases. And it's really easy peasy. And ta-da, I have a record. So I can download that record, or I can just view it here in their viewing screen. I typically will download my records because I find them easier to look at that way. So let's see what we've come up with. Oh, before we do that though, just as a note, every record that you purchase is saved in Scotland's People, and you can link to that from the header of the main page to find on the saved items link. So I get this record. I'm trying to figure out who James' parents are. I actually just love Scotland civil records. They give you so much information. This one takes a little bit extra effort to read, but let's zoom in. The first marriage on there is for Owen and Jane. And what it tells me is in 1863, on the 18th day of February at the church. I've never been able to quite read that word, and maybe someone else is better at this than I am, but it's in New Haven, Edinburgh. Marriage banns according to the form of the Free Church of Scotland. And that's the first column. And then in the next column, it says signed Owen Sullivan. And it says that he is a shoeing smith, and the RA is for the Regiment of Artillery. And he is a bachelor. And in the far right corner column, it says he's 29 years old. And below, signed Jane Johnston, laundress, spinster, and she is age 22. So that confirms a lot of what I know. And then the next column over, after the usual residence, is the names and surnames of the parents. So Owen Sullivan is the father's name. And the second line, Owen Sullivan, the second line I could not read, but I have finally, many years after I found this record, found someone who was really good at this and helped me determine that that little mess of lettering says Freemason journeyman. And it also says that he is deceased at the time of the marriage, and that his mother's name is, it says Kathryn Sullivan, and then MS, being maiden surname, is Clements. So his mother's name is Kathryn Clements. Also, if you'll notice on the left, in the left column, lower left column, it says an address. And this is where Jane lived at the time that she got married. And so I took that information and put it into Google. That's just a little side trip here. And I looked up 8 Anfield Street and found this building that looks pretty old. I haven't dug into the details on this yet, but this is maybe where she lived before she got married. So let me explain another way that I have used this website without paying for records, but helping me to sort something out. So in Family Search, I have the parents of Andrew McNabb and Janet McFadden. So Andrew and Janet had a whole bunch of children listed, and I questioned if they all belonged there. So 10 children, which I know that's possible, but there were several things that I wasn't quite sure about. So I went to Scotland's People, and this time I went to the church registers. If we go back and look at the dates on these are in the it's 1828 to 1851. So I went for the parish registers and I searched births. And I only put in the surname McNabb and the parish of Kildalton. And then I put this broad year range that would cover all of those records, all those children's births. Also, if you'll notice at the top, you need to select a church. And personally, I have never had any records show up in the Roman Catholic Church or other churches. Have always been Church of Scotland. So don't lose a lot of sleep over which one you should choose. It'd most likely be Church of Scotland, unless you have some other information that leads you to choose otherwise. So putting that search in it, also we have search options, this blue box on the right, where we can choose if we want exact names or fuzzy. You may have seen these kinds of choices. I know Ancestry does this kind of a choice. And I chose fuzzy matching because McNabb can be spelled many different ways. And I did a search and I got a good list. But notice that several of these McNabbs from Kildalton are not Andrew. I did also sort by birth date. So if you click on any of those headers, they will sort those headers. And so since I didn't want the children of Colin or John or Robert, I just wrote Andrew in the first parent name on the left and kept the rest of the search the same. I did not put in the second parent name because looking at this, I have a Jessie and I have a Janet, and those are both names for Janet. And there are 63 choices here. So I'm going to narrow it down a little bit. So once I did that, I got a really nice list of names. And that helped me match birth dates, because the information on the right is the birth date. And I have the children's names, the parents' names, and that helped me to sort through all of these records to determine which ones actually belonged. And that led me in my research to be able to sort through all of those. This is an example of an image of a parish record. And I just want to put that up there so you can see what they look like. Okay, let's move on then to census records. I think we went through this before, but I'll just tell you that on Family Search, these records are free, the 1841 through the 1901. Also in Ancestry, you can get them. You can only get in the 1921 census in Find My Past, and if you want an image, that cost, I have not recently checked that, but last I checked it was $350. And then 1911 and 1921 are in Scotland's People. So Kirk Session records, these hold a soft spot in my heart. We have access to images of the original church records by the church elders. These are local church courts that were held in the Church of Scotland since 1560s. It includes the offenses that people were committing: drunkenness, swearing, breaking the Sabbath, quarreling, sexual misdemeanors. Can be fascinating reading. And also proclamations of marriage bans, communion rolls, and poor relief accounts. So let's go back to this marriage record that I found for Owen and Jane. It shows me that Jane Johnson's mother's name was Margaret Johnston, and that is not consistent with the information that I had at that time, which led me on a bit of a chase to figure out what was going on, because I had other documents showing me that the mother's name was actually Barbara Hallcrow. So it turns out that this answer to the secret was found in Kirk records, and they were thankfully also a result of the help of a historian from the place where Jane was from, and that is in the Sandwich Islands. And my first experience with this was when I found Jane was from those islands that were way up north of Scotland, and she got married in Edinburgh. I thought that was odd. How could that happen? And I went digging, and I made a connection with some people in the town of Sandwich that were involved in the history of their area. And one person in particular sent me a bunch of information, starting with the fact that many of the young girls from their area traveled to Edinburgh. Well, actually, many people from their area. There was quite a population, a community of them in the Edinburgh area. And then the young girls would go down and work in the big houses. And then all those people up there were a lot of them were fishermen, so being on the sea was common. And so they traveled by sea from the Sandwich Islands to the Edinburgh area. And so that filled in the gaps for that. And then this gentleman helped me find some more information that was in the Kirk session. So let me show you how you would find Kirk session records. On the main page, you would choose places. And then put in a place that you want to search. Notice on the right that you have different ways that you can choose. You can browse a list of places, or you can search by a specific place. And when I search Sandwich, I get a couple of choices again. So I want specifically the parish of Sandwich. And then when I get in there, there are Kirk session records. There are also other records available, but when you get into that, you get some more choices. So the minutes of the Kirk sessions, and it comes up in that same reader, and there's an index, but it is not indexed. So this is your reading material for church session records, Kirk session records. I was fortunate in that the people of Sandwich have transcribed their records and have searched them, and my new friend in Sandwich provided the information for me, and this is what I was able to learn. So in November of 1840, Margaret Johnson, who was a widow in Stove, came before the elders and confessed that she was with child. And she had to speak the truth. And she was asked who is the father of the child. And she said that the father was James Johnson, an unmarried man in Cumlowick, and that the child was begotten on either the 19th or 20th of March. And she explained, and it's all written here in the records, how that evening played out. So then at the end of this, it tells us that the session delayed further consideration of the case until another meeting. And then at the next meeting, James was brought in, and he was interrogated if he was guilty, and he replied that he had not been with Margaret Johnson. He was not the father of the child, and he told his version of the story, and they agreed that they would put this off for another meeting and bring both of them together. And at the next meeting on December 6th of 1840, James Johnson Jr. and Margaret Johnson, both from preceding minutes, came, and James now confessed that he had been guilty of the sin of fornication with Margaret Johnson, and the session agreed that whatever discipline that was necessary would take place. And this is how I learned who Jane Johnson's mother was. And there is no else where I would have this information. And the rest of the story is that Jane was born either at the end of December or in early January, and Margaret died either in childbirth or thereafter. And by the next census in the spring, James was married to Barbara, who is listed in Family Search as being Jane's mother. So in essence, Barbara raised Jane, but she was not her birth mother. Thank you to the Kirk session records for helping to clarify that information. And thank you for historians around the world who know what they're doing and help the rest of us. This is another good time to pause. Is there anything else we need to address?
Kathy, there was one question that said, what year did the website start?
So I'm not entirely sure when the website started. I don't know if that's exactly the question, or what year are the records available on that, what year records are available. So The records are available from the 1600s. The website has been there for as long, well, I can't remember 5+ years that I've been looking at Scotland records, but it could have started much sooner than that, or much before that.
There's also a comment, can you see the records without paying for them?
No. Now, sometimes that's a great question because it can be a pain, especially if you just need one record and you don't want to buy a bunch of credits. You may not use them all. But sometimes I will use the information that I find in the indexed list and then take that to another source, say, okay, now I know that this record exists. These are the people, these are their names, these are the dates. And then I will search the other sources to see if I can find the image of that record. So it's still helpful, even if you aren't going to pay to see the records.
One more question. When trying to read the script, what sources do you use to get help?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that question because there's a source in the Scotland's People website that we're going to take a look at. I was fortunate to have had an expert put in sitting right next to me at the family history library. And I mentioned that I had this record and didn't know what it was. And she was very familiar with occupations and the types of things that would be in there. And her experience helped me to read that one really tough spot in my record. So let's take a look at some of the other things that are available. We're not going to dig into all of these, but I just want you to be aware of these things. And so we've kind of touched on these earlier, but just many, many different kinds of records that you can find. And the ones that are indexed are usually the ones that you pay for. You do have to pay to download illustrations. It just depends on what thing you're looking at in terms of paying. There is a lot of help available in the Scotland's People website, getting started, how to use the site. There are records and research guides. There is a list of 51 different guides for how to do the research. And so that's a really great resource to look through as you're getting to know this website. You'll notice also at the top of this header, there's order a certificate. And that is, if you do need some more current information than what's available on the website, you can request those things too. But let's take a look at the handwriting resource. So they have tutorials and resources for help reading documents that were written from it says here 16th to 18th centuries, but there's also, I saw a link for some 19th century. So here's a new terminology maybe for some people. It's paleography is the study of handwriting, and posers. So first thing I think of when I see the word poser is someone who tries to pretend to be something they're not, but that's not what this is. So a poser in this term, in the sense of paleography, is like a tutorial. So there are tons of posers in the Scotland's People website. And you can practice reading these records. You can look at them arranged by the type of record. You can look at them also arranged by date. And then, so let's pop in and see what some of our options are here. So this is from one of the pages. This is an example of what the poser is. They give you a sample and then they ask you the bottom, they give you a little bit of information. So this is an Aberdeen Old Parish Register of Marriages, and it's from 1672. So we know the further back it is, the harder it is to read the handwriting as a general rule. And this is a register entry from this period. The handwriting is neat, but some of the letters may be a little bit unfamiliar to the modern eye. So watch out for some abbreviations of words and some creative spellings and so on in these particulars. So then they say, can you figure out the names of the two couples who are getting married? So I'm going to give you all a chance to try that out. Oh, and I have a bigger picture of it for you. So who's getting married? So put your answer in the chat if you can figure it out. We have one guess of a James and a Margot. Barbara, bottom paragraph, James and Margaret. It looks like a pretty good guess. Okay, here we go. Here's the transcript of the entire record. Marriages, 1672 is the years, okay? John with an E, and Lang and Christian Hanton, I'm just going to say it the way I would say it, were married the 19th day of November in 1672. So that name that we think looks like Margaret, or, well, no, there is a Margaret in the second paragraph. So the second paragraph is James and Margaret. James Johnson, a brother to the Laird of Craig, and Margaret Alexander were married the 23rd of November in 1672 years. So as you can see, that would take a little bit of practice to get good at this, but you can do the practice in the Scotland's People website. There is plenty of resources for practice. So I talk fast. I've at the end of my presentation, so we all get out of class early today. Let's see, are there any general questions that anyone has that I can answer? We can try to answer. Yeah, Gordon, I wonder if AI would translate that okay. My guess is not any of the AI programs I've used, but there could be some that are good at it.